Hello, everyone. We're just going to quickly run through some scholars on Odysseus's characterization today. A few ones which might come up and be useful for the exam. So, we're going to start off with my favourite of the scholarly quotes for the Odyssey. It's by Robin Sowerby, and it goes as follows: Homer's polytropic hero and polytropic plot reflect each other perfectly. Odysseus's character unfolds naturally with the action. Now, let's just quickly look at what does Sowerby actually mean by this word polytropic. And he's actually referring to an epithet, polytropos, which is applied to Odysseus quite a lot. It's actually one of the first that's applied to him. You can loosely translate it as much wandering of many turns, a changeable sort of quality. Now, this is actually a bit of a sort of humorous, there's a double meaning to this that Homer is doing, because Odysseus is both literally much wandering because of his journey, but also it's a way of referring to somebody and saying that they are changeable, that they have this twisting nature to them. What we often refer to as Odysseus being cunning or tricky because of his ability to act and change depending on the situation. So, what is Sowerby actually saying then, now that we understand what that polytropic word means? Well, he's saying that Odysseus's character, him as a hero, is defined by his ability to be changeable, to be tricky, to adapt to the situation. But he's actually perfectly suited to the plot that is presented to him. So it's not something which is necessarily him being sort of plonked down into a world where that's unusual. Actually, the plot is almost custom built for Odysseus. There are situations where only he would be able to actually deal with the potential issue. The Cyclops is a great example here. What other hero would be able to deal with the Cyclops? Odysseus is intelligent enough to realize that, well, if we were to kill the Cyclops, we get stuck in the cave. He's intelligent enough to realize that if he gives his name to the Cyclops, a problem may ensue, so he calls himself Nobody. And then, of course, the Cyclops fails to call for help. And then finally, when they're trying to escape, Odysseus realizes that they need to go under the sheep. Otherwise, they'll never be able to exit the cave at all. So all of these things, you can't really imagine another hero in the ancient Greek world being able to come up with such good solutions to those problems. And it's all thanks to this key quality of Odysseus. This then is actually very similar to what a lot of other scholars talk about. As you'd imagine, this is a quality which a lot of scholars pinpoint on. So let's have a look at how other scholars treat this slightly differently. So we're going to start off with Barbara Graziosi. It's quite similar. It's difficult to know what to make of him or even pinpoint his identity. By turns, a comic character, a tragic hero, a stoic sage, and a villain. So Graziosi agrees with this idea of him being polytropic, of him having many different sides to him, that he has all of these different sort of twisting turns to his character. And so in different points in the story, Graziosi argues that he can be a tragic hero or even a villain. And so he is not easily sort of placed into just one box of who he is as a person, polytropic. The difference then with what Graziosi argues is that Graziosi views Odysseus' character as being split, that he's in some way unable to be just sort of one individual. And so she views this polytropic nature as him being torn between different things. One of the key things she talks about, which links really her view of characterization with the theme of identity in the Odyssey, is she talks about how Odysseus simultaneously wants to be a survivor, but that doesn't really necessarily match with other elements of the story. So she points out, his desire to survive is essentially this refusal to die. So him clinging onto the tree so that he can't be sucked into Charybdis. His ability to overcome all the obstacles, to not even eat when he's on the sun god's island because his desire to live is so strong. And yet, when presented with the opportunity to be immortal, he turns it down. So there is not this sort of consistency to him. He's driven by so many different factors, in Graziosi's opinion, that he actually ends up being somewhat sort of almost juxtaposed the character. He's different and he's torn. So this is a really interesting interpretation of a very similar quality. The next scholar, though, has quite a different view from these two. William Camp's views all of the stuff that we've just talked about as not complexity, not that Odysseus is torn, but actually that it makes Odysseus almost quite straightforward. So the quote, characterized in fairly simple terms, his two dominant qualities, resource and endurance, were evidently given in the tradition and necessarily illustrated with persistence in the story. Characterized in simple terms. That's very different from this view that this polytropic character, that he's torn, that he's all of these different people. That suggests that Odysseus is quite complicated. But Camp says, actually, no, because in pretty much all situations, he is dominated by two qualities. He's resourceful and he wants to endure. Everything else is just driven by him doing the same things. So yes, he may be cunning, yes, he may be changeable, but that's just because he uses his resourcefulness. And what Camp goes on to really talk about then is that Homer doesn't really characterize Odysseus, but instead gives you characteristics. So Odysseus is defined by a set of characteristics, but you don't really get any deep, meaningful characterization behind those things, in Camp's view, at least. Instead, then, Camps argues that there is something which is beyond Odysseus, which is the significance, i.e., his nostos, and that is the thing which is really significant about the character. His sort of desire and the way that the story treats his quest for nostos is the thing which actually makes it interesting. But actually, the complexity lies therefore with the nostos, not with Odysseus's character. This is therefore quite useful if you're looking for that evaluation. If you're looking for a scholar who says something a bit different from what you're more likely to argue, and I think most people probably would lean more towards Odysseus's character being on the more complicated side, Camp's is a good one to have a look at. Finally, then, the last scholar we're going to look at in this video is Callen King. She argues then something a little bit different from the other three, but again, very much based around the same key ideas, this intelligence, this polytropic nature. What does Callen King say about it then? Extraordinary intelligence makes the Odyssey's hero like the gods, but his intelligence owes nothing to divine or even semi-divine parentage, and he fully comprehends human reality from the start. The qualities of endurance, guile, and restraint that ensure his survival in the great wanderings are also those that ensure victory at home. Callen King's argument is quite interesting then, because really she argues that Odysseus's qualities are fundamentally tied to his humanity, that he isn't unusual in a sense. He's not like a hero like Achilles, and Achilles is clearly in the Iliad because he's directly descended from a goddess, and because there's this myth that he can't be killed unless his ankle, his weak point, is wounded, that almost creates this sense that Achilles is beyond humanity. But interestingly, Callen King argues that Odysseus's extraordinary intelligence actually makes him closer to the immortals, despite the fact that he's very mortal himself. Odysseus is not the direct descendant of a god. He is technically descended from Hermes, but not sort of within a generation of him. This is therefore something which Odysseus is unusual compared with a lot of heroes if you're looking outside of the Odyssey. But within the Odyssey, he himself is unusual. So it's not to say that every single human can do the same things as Odysseus, and Callen King does not think that. She actually argues that his skills are definitely beyond the normal human. If you look at the crew, for example, they're not able to endure the starvation that they go through on the sun god's island. They have to eat the cattle. Whilst Odysseus, he realizes, and his desire to endure is so strong that he would rather starve at the chance of survival than eat and know that you're doomed. So this is something that Callen King is very keen to point out. But Odysseus' character, therefore, is not one that changes, and it doesn't have dualities. Instead, it is really aligned with the desires of Nostos and the desires of Zeus. So although Callen King is not really saying too much different, what she fundamentally sees as the kind of ideas behind characterization is she doesn't view it as a question of a change in identity, and she doesn't view it as him necessarily being polytropic in the sense that you can't pinpoint, or that it makes him simplistic. Instead, she sees it as he is fundamentally aligned with the key quality of Nostos, and he's aligned with the desires of Zeus and the ethical desires of Zeus as well. And hence, at the end of the story, Odysseus's actions are justified because his character is aligned with Zeus's. So that takes you through 4 different scholars and ones that you can potentially use in essay questions, the 30 markers linking into Odysseus's character.